Imagine a murder victim coming back from the grave to name her killer. Could a spirit truly help solve a real-life crime? Tonight's story isn't a horror movie. It's a documented case from the American courts in 1977. Welcome to the channel Midnight Hour. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell because what you're about to hear will leave you speechless. February 1977. A fire breaks out in an apartment in Chicago. Firefighters rush in, putting out the blaze before it spreads. But what they find inside is horrifying. A woman's body, partially burned, a kitchen knife driven deep into her chest. Her name was Teresita Bassa, a kind and dedicated psychiatric worker known for her gentle nature. But here's what shocked investigators. There were no signs of forced entry. Whoever did this, she had let them in. This story was documented in the American courts in Chicago in 1977. I mention this detail because the story is so bizarre that it's hard to comprehend. A warning, this tale contains elements of horror. One day in February 1977, a report came in about a fire breaking out in an apartment in a building in Chicago, USA. The police, firefighters, and paramedics were dispatched. The firefighters managed to control the blaze, which was partial and did not spread to other apartments. Then, the police, forensic team, and criminal investigators entered the scene to check for any victims. They found a body. The body belonged to a woman named Teresita Bassa, of Filipino descent. She was a psychiatrist working at Edgewater Hospital in Chicago. Teresita was known for her kindness, dedication, and professionalism. She was a compassionate, hardworking woman who loved helping others. What was strange about the case was that her body was found naked, wrapped in bed sheets, with a kitchen knife plunged into her chest. Half of her body had been consumed by the fire. Another peculiar detail was that there were no signs of forced entry into the apartment, no broken doors or windows. This suggested that the perpetrator was someone Teresita knew, as she likely opened the door for them. If it had been a stranger, there would have been signs of a break-in. Investigators also noted that, despite being found naked and wrapped in sheets, Teresita had not been sexually assaulted, only murdered. The fire had destroyed much of the apartment's contents, leaving no fingerprints or other evidence that could point to a suspect. 6 months later, strange things began to happen. A nurse named Remy Chua, who worked at the same hospital as Teresita, began having vivid nightmares. Every night, she saw Teresita, standing before her, a shadowy man behind her. And soon, Remy started speaking in her sleep, in a voice that wasn't hers. She said, "I am Teresita. Alan Showery killed me." Could it be that the spirit of Teresita had possessed her friend to expose her murderer? The police hit a dead end. They initially suspected 2 individuals who had been in contact with Teresita before the incident. The first to call her apartment was at 7:10 p.m., and the second was at 7:30 p.m. The first suspect was a friend who had been tasked by a group of friends to call Teresita about arranging tickets for a concert. His alibi checked out, as his friends confirmed he was with them at the time of the crime and he was cleared. The second suspect was a colleague from the hospital, a member of the nursing staff who had called to coordinate night shift schedules. He too was cleared, as his call was work-related. With no other leads, the police were stumped. 6 months later, something strange happened, marking the beginning of the case's unraveling. A woman named Remy Chua, a nurse who worked at the same hospital as Teresita and was also of Filipino descent, began having disturbing nightmares. At first, she thought they were just bad dreams caused by stress, but the nightmares persisted for days. They became so vivid and overwhelming that Remy felt she was reliving the events of the dreams even after waking up. Her husband, a psychiatrist who also worked at the hospital, tried to comfort her, dismissing the dreams as normal, but the situation worsened. In her dreams, Remy saw Teresita standing with a man behind her. She felt the man's face was familiar, but couldn't quite make it out because he stood behind Teresita. The same dream repeated night after night, and over time, Remy began to see the final moments of Teresita's life. How the killer entered her apartment, how he attacked her, and the details of the murder. Remy was deeply affected, as Teresita had been her close friend. She was devastated by her death and desperate to know who killed her and why. The nightmares took over her life to the point where she couldn't sleep, was constantly terrified, and developed anxiety, depression, and even a phobia. 6 months later, strange things began to happen. A nurse named Remy Chua, who worked at the same hospital as Teresita, began having vivid nightmares. Every night, she saw Teresita, standing before her, a shadowy man behind her. And soon, Remy started speaking in her sleep, in a voice that wasn't hers. She said, "I am Teresita. Alan Showery killed me." Could it be that the spirit of Teresita had possessed her friend to expose her murderer? Her husband, Dr. Jose Chua, prescribed psychiatric medication to help with her anxiety and depression, but her condition only deteriorated. She began to speak in Teresita's voice, adopting her mannerisms and tone. Dr. Chua, who knew Teresita well as a colleague, was shocked. His wife was speaking as if she were Teresita, recounting details of the murder. She would say, "I am Teresita, and Alan Showery killed me." She described how Showery, a janitor at the hospital, had entered her apartment, killed her, and stolen her jewelry, a pearl necklace and gold earrings that her father had bought for her mother in France, who later passed them on to Teresita. Remy even provided the name and phone number of Teresita's uncle, Ken Bassa, along with other details about people connected to the killer. Dr. Chua, realizing this was beyond a psychological issue, contacted the police. He spoke to Detective Joseph, who was in charge of Teresita's case. Dr. Chua explained that his wife, a nurse and colleague of Teresita, was having dreams that had escalated to the point where she was speaking in Teresita's voice, claiming that Alan Showery was the killer. She provided specific details about the crime that only the victim or someone present could know. Detective Joseph was skeptical, as the idea seemed far-fetched. However, with no other leads, he decided to investigate. He interrogated Remy as if she were Teresita, with her husband present. Remy, in Teresita's voice, reiterated that Alan Showery had killed her and stolen her jewelry, which he later gave to his girlfriend, Yanka Kamluk. She provided further details, including the names and phone numbers of people connected to Showery. Showery confessed at first to the murder, the theft, and setting the fire to hide the evidence. Later, he took it all back, claiming Teresita had given him the jewelry. But the jury was torn. How could they ignore a confession backed by details from beyond the grave? He was sentenced to 14 years in prison, but served only 5. The case became a legend, inspiring the book and film Voice from the Grave. The police arrested Showery and his girlfriend. They found the stolen jewelry in Yanka's possession. When questioned, Yanka confirmed that Showery had given her the jewelry as a New Year's gift, shortly after Teresita's murder. This matched the timeline, as the crime had occurred over 6 months earlier, and the jewelry was confirmed to be Teresita's. Showery initially claimed he had entered the apartment to steal, but found Teresita already dead. However, under pressure, he confessed. He admitted that Teresita, who knew him from the hospital, had asked him to come to her apartment to fix a broken vase, as he had some repair skills. When he saw her wearing the valuable jewelry, he couldn't resist. He attacked her, strangled her until she lost consciousness, and then stabbed her in the chest with a kitchen knife to ensure she was dead. He confessed to removing her clothes with the intent to assault her, but backed out, fearing he'd be caught. He then wrapped her in sheets and set the apartment on fire to destroy evidence. Showery's confession aligned perfectly with the details Remy had provided. He was charged and brought to trial in 1979. However, the case's bizarre nature, particularly Remy's claim of being possessed by Teresita's spirit, caused confusion among the jury and judge. Both Remy and her husband were psychiatric professionals, yet they couldn't fully explain the phenomenon. Dr. Chua admitted it was unlike anything he had encountered. During the trial, Showery recanted his confession, claiming he was gambling with friends, including his girlfriend, at the time of the murder. However, Yanka denied this, confirming they weren't together that night. Showery then claimed Teresita had given him the jewelry in exchange for services, but the police dismissed this, noting the jewelry's significant sentimental value to Teresita. The jury, after 5 days of deliberation, reached a verdict. They acknowledged that all evidence pointed to Showery's guilt, but the supernatural element of Remy's testimony left them uncertain. To balance the case's strangeness, they sentenced Showery to 14 years in prison for murder, theft, and arson, a relatively lenient sentence for such a crime. Teresita's family took her body back to the Philippines for burial. Showery served only 5 years due to good behavior and was released. He later married a woman named Naomi, who had followed his case closely and sympathized with him, attending his hearings and staying in touch during his imprisonment. After his release, Showery was hounded by the media, but he refused to speak and disappeared from public view. The case of Teresita Basa became a famous one in American courts, inspiring books, films, and TV shows. A book titled Voice from the Grave detailed the case, and a 1996 film of the same name was produced, emphasizing that all details were based on real events and real names. The story remains one of the most intriguing and mysterious cases in legal history. Do you believe Teresita Basa's spirit really came back to reveal her killer? Or was it just a terrifying twist of the human mind? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next story might be even stranger than this one. Until next time, remember, in the world of true crime, sometimes the dead don't stay silent. The Ghost in the Shadows. A teenager, a genealogist, and the 57-year hunt for Maurice Chivarella's killer. In the quiet coal town of Hazleton, Pennsylvania, a single day in 1964 shattered a community's innocence and launched a mystery that would haunt generations. 9-year-old Maurice Ann Chivarella, a girl with a heart as pure as her faith, stepped out into the crisp March morning, never to return. Her brutal murder, discovered in a desolate coal mine dump, became a wound that refused to heal, a ghost that lingered in the archives of the Pennsylvania State Police. For 57 years, the killer remained a phantom, slipping through the fingers of 250 investigators, 4,700 pages of reports, and 9,000 interviews. The case seemed cursed, defying every tool of traditional detective work, until an 18-year-old college student, armed with the revolutionary science of investigative genetic genealogy, IgG, did what decades of seasoned police could not. This is the story of Maurice, the shadow that stalked Hazleton, and the unlikely hero who brought truth to light. But what no one knew was that this quiet morning would awaken a nightmare that lasted half a century. Maurice Ann Chivarella was born on Thanksgiving Day, 1954, a tiny spark of joy to Carmen and Mary Chivarella, who ran the Little Market, a cozy grocery store next to their Alter Street apartment in Hazleton. Barely 50 pounds, with a shy smile and gentle soul, Maurice was the picture of innocence. She helped her father stock shelves, greeted customers with quiet warmth, and earned the nickname the Little Mother for her tender care of her family's home. A devout Catholic, she attended daily mass at St. Joseph Parochial School, her dreams woven with faith. When she played dress-up, she didn't imagine herself as a princess, but as a nun, wrapping a cloth around her head, her hands clasped in prayer. On March 18, 1964, Maurice made a choice that would change everything. It was a nun's feast day, and she wanted to deliver a small gift, 2 cans of fruit she'd carefully wrapped, before 8 a.m. Mass. Normally, her fear of dogs kept her from walking alone, but her heart pushed her forward. For the first time, she left home without her siblings, stepping into the cold morning air. Her cousin, Helen Slattery, caught a fleeting glimpse of her at 8:10 a.m., walking east on 4th Street near North Church, just 5 minutes from home. It was the last time anyone saw Maurice alive. Days turned into weeks, and the town's innocence slowly faded into fear. By early afternoon, the unthinkable unfolded. Arthur Robinson, driving a dirt road near Hazleton's municipal airport toward an abandoned coal mine turned dump, spotted something horrific 26 feet amid the debris, the small, lifeless body of a child. He raced home to call the police. The Pennsylvania State Police confirmed it was Maurice Chivarella. Dr. Julius Folse's autopsy revealed a nightmare. The 9-year-old had been sexually assaulted and died of asphyxiation. Hazleton, a town where doors once stayed unlocked, reeled in horror. Maurice's murder was the first of its kind in the town's history, obliterating the illusion that things like this don't happen here. Fear spread like wildfire, as Robert Gillespie, then a high school student, recalled, like smoke through the streets. Doors were bolted before dusk, parents escorted children to school, and community watch groups sprang up. Corporal Barron put it bluntly. After March 18, 1964, Hazleton's way of life was never the same. The Chivarella family's grief was a bottomless chasm. Hundreds gathered at the funeral home, where Maurice's classmates and Catholic Girls Club sisters mourned. Her mother, Mary, gave her a final kiss before the casket closed, a gesture that carried the weight of a wound that wouldn't heal. Mary lived until 2014, her heart scarred. Carmen, her father, died in 2006, never knowing who took his daughter. For the Chivarellas, justice wasn't just a hope, it was a generational vow. Despite every effort, the killer remained a shadow, without a name, without a face. The Pennsylvania State Police threw everything at the case, launching one of the largest investigations in their history. Over decades, 250 investigators logged tens of thousands of miles, compiling 4,700 pages of reports and questioning 9,000 people. They scoured Hazleton, knocking on doors, checking school absentee lists, and tracking known criminals, desperate to determine if the killer was a drifter or, more chillingly, one of their own. The meticulous preservation of physical evidence, especially the bodily fluid on Maurice's clothing, would later prove to be a stroke of genius, though it couldn't crack the case in 1964. In the frantic first 2 months, police released 4 composite sketches based on eyewitness accounts, each a glimpse of a potential killer lurking near Maurice's path or the dump site. The sketches painted a confusing picture, reflecting the flood of tips and the challenge of pinpointing one suspect. The Pine Street Driver, May 19, 1964. A bald, gaunt white man seen at 8 a.m. on Pine Street turning onto Maurice's last known route. The timing was haunting, but he vanished into thin air. The Mine Driver, May 20th, 1964. A middle-aged white man with a round face, glasses, and a hat, driving an old light green car near the mine between 8:45 and 9 a.m., hours before Maurice's body was found. His description matched a man who attempted to abduct a 9-year-old in Freeland months later, hinting at a local predator. The Litterer, May 22, 1964. A clean-cut man in his 20s, neatly dressed, wanted for attempting an assault near Maurice's neighborhood. He lingered suspiciously in the area. The Watcher, May 22, 1964. The most unsettling. A stocky man with a rough, wrinkled face and graying hair, parked in a faded black Chevrolet on 4th Street every morning for 2 weeks. On March 18th, Maurice vanished, and so did he. These sketches were ghosts, fleeting glimpses of a killer who left no clear trace. The investigation uncovered a disturbing truth. Hazleton was home to more predators than anyone imagined. Yet, none of the suspects proved to be Maurice's killer, and the focus on these deviants kept the case frozen. Sam Lavin, a vagrant from Hazleton, arrested in Scranton days after the murder. His mental health history and lack of evidence cleared him. Albert R. Dennis, caught approaching young girls in Palmerton, but his alibi held firm. Bruce Edward Hildebrand, confessed 2 weeks after the crime, but his knowledge came from newspapers, and a polygraph exposed his false confession, driven by depression and a death wish. Matthew Douglas lived steps from Maurice's home and had just pleaded guilty to crimes against children. His alibi, however, checked out. Chester Conrad surfaced in 1985, hoarding clippings of Maurice's case among disturbing materials. Despite initial excitement, no evidence tied him to the murder. These red herrings revealed a darker Hazelton, but they also blinded investigators of the true killer, hiding in plain sight. The closest the police came to a suspect was Harold Rudolph Nicholas, a 51-year-old neighbor living one building from the Chivarellas. Known for exposing himself to children, he was an early person of interest. During questioning, he claimed to have stayed home the morning Maurice disappeared, but slipped, mentioning the cold weather, a detail that betrayed him. Ordered to take a polygraph, Nicholas never showed. Instead, police found him dead in his car, a hose rigged to pump carbon monoxide inside. His suicide screamed guilt to many investigators. Nicholas became the case's fixation, the one who got away. For decades, his death offered a false sense of closure, diverting resources from the real killer. Without a confession or hard evidence, he remained a haunting specter, not the answer. Decades passed, reports piled up, yet the truth was still buried in the dust of time. In 1964, DNA testing was science fiction, yet the investigators' foresight was remarkable. They carefully preserved the bodily fluid on Maurice's sweater, a fragile thread that would later become the case's lifeline. Without this, no technology could have revived the investigation. Then, after 57 years of silence, an unexpected hero emerged. As forensic science advanced, police revisited the case yearly, refining the DNA sample for the FBI's CODIS database. But every search came up empty. The killer's DNA didn't match any profile in CODIS, not because the system failed, but because the killer, James Paul Forte, died in 1980, long before DNA databases existed. Investigators were searching for a living criminal or a recently deceased one, not a ghost from 4 decades past. Traditional forensics had hit a wall, unable to find a man who'd slipped through time's cracks. By the 2010s, investigative genetic genealogy, IgG, emerged as a game changer. Unlike CODIS, which relied on criminal databases, IgG tapped public genealogy platforms, tracing DNA through distant relatives. This wasn't just a tool, it was a revolution, demanding a new kind of detective. He was just 18, but what he uncovered changed everything. In February 2020, an email landed in the Pennsylvania State Police inbox, sounding almost too strange to be true. Eric Schubert, an 18-year-old history major at Elizabethtown College, offered his genealogy skills for free. No badge, no PhD, just a kid with an extraordinary gift for untangling family trees. Trooper Anthony Petrosky was skeptical. Eric's photo made him look like a high schooler. But at their meeting, sipping apple juice, Eric presented a professional resume, a website, and references from 2 police departments he'd helped with cold cases. He'd honed his craft since age 8, turning a hobby into precision science. Driven by the horror of Maurice's murder, he wanted to give her family even a sliver of peace. His confidence won them over. This teenager was no amateur, he was a prodigy. Eric Schubert represented a seismic shift in forensics. Cold cases no longer belonged solely to grizzled detectives, but to data wizards like him. IgG blended old-school genealogy, births, deaths, marriages, with DNA analysis, tracing suspects through distant cousins. Eric's role forced police to rethink expertise, embracing a civilian whose skills outstripped their own. Eric started with the partial DNA from Maurice's sweater and some early matches from police tests. He uploaded the profile to GED Match and Family Tree DNA, public platforms used by ancestry enthusiasts. Instantly, thousands of partial matches appeared. Distant cousins, some as far removed as 6th cousins or descendants of the killer's ancestors. IgG didn't point to one person, but to a sprawling family line. One single piece of the puzzle was all it took to bring the past back to life. Eric called it a massive puzzle. He traced each match, building 50 detailed family trees, cross-referencing births, migrations, and deaths. A breakthrough came when he found a man who immigrated from Italy to Hazleton in 1904, James Paul Forte's grandfather. This anchored the search to Hazleton, narrowing the focus to local descendants alive in 1964. From thousands of leads, Eric whittled the list to 30 names, handed to the police. Using traditional methods, checking birth dates, criminal records, and alibis, investigators narrowed it down to 4 men. Only one was alive. Undercover officers staked out his home for a DNA sample, but after days of no luck, they asked directly. His DNA didn't match perfectly, but confirmed the family line, pointing to his deceased brothers. Testing a hairbrush from one excluded him, leaving James Paul Forte as the final match. IgG wasn't a magic bullet. It was a map, guiding police to the truth through old-school legwork. And in the end, justice arose from the shadows. After 57 years, the ghost had a name: James Paul Forte. In 1964, he was a 22-year-old bartender in Hazleton, dead by 1980 at age 38. When his name was revealed in 2022, Hazleton whispered, "Who?" Forte was never a suspect, never a red herring. He was a nobody, a predator hiding in plain sight. Forte's anonymity was his armor. A history of violent sexual assaults marked him, yet he evaded the psychological profiles of 1964. His early death and low profile kept him off CODIS and police radars. He lived 6 blocks from Maurice's home, across from the cemetery where she was buried, a chilling proximity that hinted at a twisted connection to his crime. Eric's IgG evidence was compelling, but for a case this monumental, absolute certainty was needed. The police took a drastic step, exhuming Forte's body. A rare move, reserved only for cases like the Boston Strangler, it underscored the stakes. Only a perfect DNA match could close a 57-year wound. Months later, the results came. Forte's DNA was a perfect match to the sample on Maurice's sweater. No cheers erupted, only silence. A trooper whispered, "We got him." The oldest case in Pennsylvania history, solved through IgG and exhumation, was finally at rest. Forte's 1980 death meant no trial, no handcuffs. Justice for the Chivarellas came in knowing his name, not in seeing him punished. Maurice's siblings found partial closure, grateful he could harm no more. Police believed Forte committed other crimes, calling for tips to uncover his full legacy of violence. Maurice Chivarella's case is a testament to persistence and progress. For 57 years, it exposed the limits of traditional policing as false leads and Harold Nicholas's suicide clouded the truth. James Paul Forte, a ghost in Hazleton's shadows, was unmasked by the brilliance of Eric Schubert, a teenager who rewrote the rules of justice. The case's resolution honors the 1964 investigators who preserved a single drop of evidence and the modern police who trusted an unlikely hero. Though Maurice's parents died without answers, her siblings found peace. The case sets a precedent for cold case resolutions, proving IgG's power while sparking debate over genetic privacy. Maurice's story, once a wound, is now a beacon of hope, a reminder that even ghosts can't hide forever. Do you think justice was truly served even though the killer died decades ago? How do you feel about using genetic genealogy to solve crimes? Is it a breakthrough or an invasion of privacy? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to read your opinions. August 2021, Fort Worth, Texas. A dumpster fire quietly burns off Bonnie Drive. When firefighters put out the flames around 3 a.m., what they find inside shocks even the most seasoned investigators. 3 dismembered, badly charred bodies. It's the beginning of a case that will unravel one of the most disturbing killing sprees Texas has seen in years, and reveal the mind of a murderer who claimed he was offering human sacrifices in the name of God. For more, Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and don't forget to like and share. On August 29, 2021, residents near Bonnie Drive notice smoke rising from a dumpster. Fire crews arrive, and once the fire is extinguished, they make a horrifying discovery: human remains chopped into pieces. 3 bodies, severed hands and feet, a decapitated head. Everything burned beyond recognition. Whoever was behind this had even erased fingerprints and dental marks. The only tangible lead investigators have is a grainy surveillance video showing a Jeep Cherokee pulling up to the dumpster around 3 a.m. Homicide detectives and digital forensics teams immediately begin recovering footage. Meanwhile, forensic specialists carefully extract DNA from the charred bones and cross-match it with the database of missing persons. Within days, the victims are identified. David Luares, 42, from Fort Worth, a man with a history of petty crime. Merrick Cruz Mathis, 33, a mother of 6. Lauren Phillips, 34, who had recently become friends with the killer and was hoping to turn her life around. None of them had been reported missing together. So, how did their paths cross? Who lured them to their deaths? The Jeep in the surveillance footage becomes the critical clue. Police trace it back to a friend of Jason Allen Thornburg, a 41-year-old apprentice electrician. Investigators quickly locate Thornburg's own Grand Cherokee and find out he'd been staying at the Mid-City Inn in Euless, Texas. Hotel cameras confirm it. The very night the bodies were dumped, Thornburg is seen walking from his room to his Jeep, carrying large Rubbermaid containers and wearing a protective suit normally used for hazardous materials cleanup. When questioned, Thornburg doesn't deny it. Instead, in a chillingly calm voice, he admits he killed 3 people in his hotel room and burned their remains to free their souls. He explains that he has a deep knowledge of the Bible and truly believes God commands human sacrifice. Crime scene technicians later find pools of blood under the bed, cuts in the bathtub, and surgical tools left behind. Thornburg describes, in meticulous detail, how over 4 days he slaughtered David Luares and Merrick Mathis, strangled Lauren Phillips with an electrical cord, and then dismembered their bodies in the hotel bathtub. He confesses to eating part of Luares' heart. After each killing, he bagged the remains, hid them under his bed, and eventually transported them in storage bins to the dumpster where he set them on fire. Detectives suddenly realize they've stumbled across a serial killer who believes he's working in service of God. And the confessions don't stop there. When asked if there were other victims, Thornburg says yes. He admits to killing his roommate, Mark Jewell, 61, back in May 2021. At the time, it was written off as an accidental house fire. Thornburg now tells police he slit Jewell's throat, opened a gas line, lit a candle, and blew up the home. He also shocks investigators by admitting he killed his girlfriend, Tania B.I., in 2017. A mother of 2, Tania vanished after leaving her aunt's home in Tehachapi, New Mexico with Thornburg. She had previously filed a domestic violence case against him, claiming he hit her with a coffee pot and choked her. Just weeks before she disappeared, Gallup police had found her bleeding after another fight with Thornburg. She told them he had thrown a glass coffee pot at her face. She was hospitalized, and then she was gone. Jason Thornburg's mind was a disturbing contradiction. Disciplined enough to plan elaborate murders, yet chaotic enough to justify them with mystical delusions. Forensic psychologists later identified several traits. Religious delusions, believing God had personally commanded him to kill. Sadistic tendencies, deriving satisfaction from controlling, hurting, and mutilating others. Psychopathic traits, lacking empathy, manipulating trust, displaying superficial charm. Ritualistic behavior, killing, dismembering, and burning bodies suggested an obsessive need to dominate not only the living, but the dead. By destroying the body, he may have believed he erased the person entirely, completing his mission. The defense argued Thornburg suffered from severe mental illness and sought to excuse his crimes. But in September 2021, police arrested Jason Thornburg. Hotel manager Kanti Gandhi later said nothing about him raised suspicion. He seemed normal. I spoke to him many times. He never revealed anything. Thornburg was taken into custody on September 25th. Within weeks, a Tarrant County grand jury indicted him on 3 counts of capital murder. In February 2022, another grand jury added charges of murder and arson for the death of Mark Jewell. New Mexico authorities reopened the case of Tania B.I. Thornburg underwent a psychiatric evaluation but was declared competent to stand trial. Prosecutors announced they would seek the death penalty. The defense argued that the killer should be excused, claiming he was mentally ill. My question to you, the viewer, do you believe that's true? And my second question, after hearing this terrifying story, do you still trust people so easily? Share your thoughts in the comments. Victims' families confronted him in court, describing the pain he had caused.
It turned into an unbearable pain. It still hurts. Still hurts, sir. And coming to this trial for the last few weeks, almost a month, just reopen all those wounds.
The Lord is a great start in life with a strong foundation, hard-working parents with long careers, stellar grandparents with Christian values that set the character for our homes. But here we are, trying to understand the addictions that set her on a path that crossed the demon lot called Joseph Thornburg. God takes great care in giving us life and free will to be good people. Joseph Thornburg, you have committed the ultimate blasphemy against God. And for me, you took my little sister from us. You took her from Zay to Chloe, Zay and Zoe. And you show no remorse for what you did. You won't even tell us where she's at.
On December 4th, 2024, Jason Allen Thornburg was sentenced to death. Today, he sits on death row, awaiting execution.